All right, I think we are live. Good
Awesome.
afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It is nice to see you. I have a special guest with me today, and we're going to be having some fun, but we're also going to be having some discussions around a very topical subject right now. So I would like you to introduce you to my guest, but I'm going to get him to introduce himself. Bron, I would love you to tell us a little bit more about yourself, how you got into the wedding industry, and what it is you do in the wedding industry.
Absolutely, Kylie. Thank you so much for having me. First of all, it's always a
No
pleasure
problem.
to have new ears and eyes on the subjects that I love to talk about the most. So it's a pleasure being here and sharing with your audience today. So for to keep it short, Reader's Digest version, I'm Bron Hansboro, the Flower Guy Bron. I own and operate the Flower Guy Bron LLC in Richmond, Virginia. Out in the USA. So I pride myself on offering bespoke floral and event styling services for weddings and events of all types of people, serving people with all different backgrounds. And I also have found myself as a national educator and international educator. So I speak on various wedding and event related topics. To kind of give you a little bit about my story and how I started, I
Yeah.
actually, all of my educational preparation is towards being a educator, a teacher. And so for many years, I was a teacher and then became an administrator. And then I hit a brick wall. And I tell everyone just how important self-preservation is in your life's journey. And if you ever get to a place where you're no longer feeling fulfilled with your work, it's time to reevaluate and reimagine. And so that's exactly what I did. I decided to lay down the educator hat. It was an extremely rewarding career. However, I was falling out of love with myself and really didn't have a connection to what my real purpose was. And so we started the Flower Guy Bron. It was a family effort. We started it in my mother's basement, and then we graduated upstairs to her kitchen and destroyed that. And then we decided, okay, maybe it's time for some bricks and mortar. So since 2014, we have been serving couples at a very high standard, and it's something that we really value and appreciate. And it's our biggest contribution. Our client experience is our biggest contribution to the industry. And so, yeah, so thanks again for having me. And that's a little bit about me.
Well, I love that story. I just love how you described that you destroyed the kitchen and you destroyed the basement and then you moved
Yes.
on. And
Yes, and
I think a
destroyed
lot of
that. And it's a very
us.
destructive path, but rewarding nonetheless.
Oh, I think we can all relate to that because I think
Yes.
most of us, I know I started the academy in my back bedroom and
Yes.
you could barely swing a cat in it. And
Yes.
it was just, but that's where we've all come from. It's great to see that progression. So
Absolutely.
obviously, we are here to have a discussion today
Right.
about quite a serious topic. And I think really you'd have to be living under a rock to not know about the events of the
Yeah,
last
this is
couple.
we're so gone are the conversations of awareness that we cannot say that we are not aware. It's just a matter of
Definitely.
do we agree or not, and that I can deal with. But the awareness piece, the elephant in the room, if you're missing that, you might have a vision impairment, and I can say that because I've supported children with vision impairments in my career. So it is not a jab; it's a real statement.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, what this has really highlighted is that it needed highlighting. And
Totally.
I know it certainly caused many of us to do a lot of reading, a lot of educating, a lot of reflecting. And I know I certainly have. And so here at the Wedding Academy, I
Hmm.
kind of look at it as my job to lead the industry
Hmm.
by providing the right education. That's always been the driver behind everything that I do here as CEO at the Academy. It's about education, and I wouldn't be doing my duty if I didn't lead the way with that. So that's really what this is all about. And I don't like to talk about something that I don't understand, or at
Hmm.
least have a reasonable knowledge of at any rate. And that
Yeah.
was one of my reasons for wanting to chat to you today, because I want to educate myself
Yeah.
and I also want to educate the wider community. But I can't pretend to understand or to claim I know how you feel
Hmm.
because I've never been discriminated against in any way, shape, or form. So education for me is the powerful thing. So I guess my first question is around two words,
Mm-hmm.
diversity and inclusiveness.
Yes,
So
yes.
I think what I'd love for you to be able to explain to us is what is the difference between the two of them?
Yes. So the difference between diversity and inclusion is very drastic. I think that oftentimes in our own ignorance, we use the word simultaneously because we think that they represent, something positive. However, diversity only really speaks to the characteristics within the group. It does not speak at all to how the group makes the marginalized group feel. And so I have been a part of very diverse groups, but not feeling included. So it's inclusion is more about the
Right.
intention and how that group is intending the people to feel. So I think about our wedding and event industry. You can be a part of, different networking groups and go to different conferences, and you can see a lot of different faces. However, I think the responsibility of the bigger community is to ask the minority, how do you feel here? And if you don't want to ask, I think it's easy to assume that when a marginalized or underrepresented group does not see representation of themselves on the platform, that is an example of what diversity looks like and not inclusion. And so we have to be very, very careful. And as we start to, really firm up the definitions of those words and have a firm understanding of the difference, is also important. As you were stating, you're not an expert on race relations and you haven't been discriminated against based on the color of your skin. That is why these type of conversations and why context and stories are so important. I think oftentimes because there is no more segregation in most of the parts of the world, so we're around each other, different skin tones, different ethnic backgrounds, and different religions. I think that we have a comfort level that might be a bit presumptuous. And so I don't want anyone to think that their proximity to people of color is understanding people of color. So I think that, you brought up great points, and I hope that, the definition that I gave or the explanation of the difference between diversity and inclusion kind of help us understand that, you can have different faces in the room, but if your intention is not to make those people in the room all feel welcome, then you're missing the mark. And it starts to lead into what some of us would refer to as tokenism.
And I'm going to get onto that word tokenism in a minute as well, because I think that's another big word that needs looking at in some detail. But that makes perfect sense, because I think what happens is, and I guess in some ways everybody has been guilty of this, where you think you've got this really diverse platform, but as you say, if you're not actually making people feel like they're a part of it, then it is just a token gesture. It's not actually real. So understanding that, I think, is probably the first step. And, there is this very big danger that people make these token gestures. I think we get caught up in the emotion, don't we, of what's happening right now. And we all had that blackout Tuesday, etc., which, yes, that's great. But what happens when the publicity starts to die down?
Absolutely.
How can we sort of avoid that tokenism when we're striving for diversity?
Yeah, so to get to that question, I think we have to get to answering that question, I think we have to really peel back an onion. And I have, I think every city, I think we've experienced here in the States, every state has experienced, all 50 states are experiencing some form of protesting. And what I think it's important to understand is that I have walked down many streets in my city of Richmond, Virginia, and Richmond is the former capital of the Confederacy. And so my city is steeped in racial tension, racial disparity, and racism, black and white racism. So I have to call that out. And so I have walked down some of the most popular avenues and streets that have the most beautiful shops and the most beautiful novelty items, and have walked into many of those stores and was never acknowledged as a customer, whether I was window shopping or had the full intention of purchasing. And I drove down those streets since the rioting and the protesting has begun. And all of those same businesses have boards across the front of them, and on the boards have intentionally put Black Lives Matter. And so to me, it's very ironic that as a Black person with the means to shop in your store, I was not valued before now, which makes me wonder, am I valued now, or is it just a symbolic gesture? And that's exactly what tokenism is, exactly. And in my life, I'll be 35 this year, so I'm relatively still young and absorbing information and stories to gather a really good context as I speak to different people. And it's important that I have a unifying voice. I have never seen anyone make that type of radical transformation in a week and a half's worth of time. So the type of work that it takes to go from tokenism to full inclusion is not a weak transition. It's not, oh, I've watched this on TV. Someone just brought it to my attention. Now I've made a radical change. So I think that it's important that vendors and platforms and businesses and people start to truly analyze where this agenda for themselves is coming from. I am not going to, be the judge or jury. I'm not going to be finger pointing. I'm not going to be calling people out. I think that that's counterproductive in this movement, but I am aware of how I have been made to feel on your platforms, at your conferences, and in your networking events. So be mindful that people have feelings, and that's where we move and we operate in feelings. But you have to be mindful, if you've mistreated someone, there's some healing that's going to have to take place, and it's going to start with being transparent about how you made them feel.
Which is a really good point. I mean, at the end of the day, as you quite rightly said, you can't make these massive changes in a week.
No, and expect the population to believe that it's sincere. To me, I'm thinking to myself, well, half of the businesses that have Black Lives Matter and justice for George and all of the different names of Black people who have been murdered by our law enforcement here in the United States. I just think to myself, like, oh, folks, are you doing this? Or is this a bandwagon? Is this to save your business? And I have to be brutally transparent. The perception is that it is disingenuous. And so, but however, with that, I am willing to acknowledge that it could be a potential step. Acknowledging Black Lives Matter, whether it's to save your business or you really believe it now, I'm not going to cancel out the possibility that because we're in this uncomfortable space together, that you can evolve and eventually join the movement. So I'm trying to be sensitive to everyone, whether you were on the right side of history originally, or if you're just now getting on board, because the train hasn't left the station yet. I believe that we need to take our time in this space and give people full context and give people full stories. And as long as their hearts are ready, then I'm willing to welcome them onto the train before it leaves the station. But we do know everyone's not going to go with us. But I think we just have to be very, very transparent about our objectives and our intent, be mindful of how we have treated people in the past and how those actions impact how they now respond and feel. And we have to start righting those wrongs.
There's so much truth in what you're saying there. And I think the biggest word that came out of that for me was integrity. Mm-hmm. And that's, you can understand why people feel like this is just a token gesture, and where were you all of those years before? Why has it taken something like this? And at the end of the day, this is something that is going to be ongoing for many, many years.
Absolutely.
It's not something that you can just jump on the bandwagon of and say, yep, this is great, we're behind this for this week, and then move on to something else next week. It's not about that.
Absolutely. And
understand.
to complement what you're saying, over the last few weeks or even months, because I believe, COVID-19 started me on a season of stillness and
Yeah.
reflection. And have been spending days and days and days just being very quiet in my mind and trying to process everything. And I think that that's exactly where we all need to go. I am not wanting this season of unity to rush. I think that because we're uncomfortable, that we feel like, we need to move on. So how do we chart the next steps? How do we move forward? How do we really get the wheels spinning? And I caution everyone not to be so quick to move out of this season. I
Yeah.
have learned that through discomfort, some of the greatest outcomes have occurred. And right now, we have so many eyes and ears and hearts. I believe we've always had eyes and ears on the topic of racism, but we have not had the hearts on the issue, and we haven't had the full open minds on the issue. So I'm encouraging us to take our time in this space, and again, to give everyone an opportunity to fully embrace, fully get context, fully hear stories, to put a different picture together. So that's pretty much what I'm looking forward to.
Well, I think stories are so important because, I mean, there's a reason why, as kids, we all loved stories because it puts things
Absolutely.
into context for us. It's how we learn. And I think those stories are so important because when you hear some of those stories
Totally.
about things that have happened to people throughout the years,
Hmm.
it's so much more powerful. It means so much more. And I also think there's a reason we say, get out of your comfort zone. The reason we
Absolutely.
say that is because it helps us to grow, it helps us to develop. So I think that being uncomfortable is a good thing
It
because
is a
when you're
great thing.
uncomfortable, you want to move and you want to grow and you want to beat that feeling of feeling uncomfortable and
Absolutely.
actually do something about it.
Yeah, and not only is discomfort a good thing, it's positive in this context. I think that, everyone, I am known for mainly, if not only, sharing positive content and speaking positively to any situation that I'm brought that's brought to me. But I've had to analyze and reimagine what positivity looks like. And positivity is this discomfort, because I believe, again, like I stated earlier, that all great things come from a place of discomfort. So we're trying to beat that feeling. And I want us to beat the feelings of biases, and I want us to beat the feelings of racism, and truly be on board with full inclusion of all people. And I've had a few questions and people ask, is this a movement only for Black people? What about the Hispanic community? What about other marginalized communities? And I feel and understand exactly that sentiment. However, what I will say is this is the first time in modern history that we have seen all communities all across the world rally behind Black people. And that is such a unique thing. I've never felt it, and I don't believe that my ancestors have felt it. And so what I would say is that right now, this forward momentum that we have with the world supporting a historically marginalized group deserves the support of everyone. And I just only hope and pray that every community that feels underserved, underprivileged, and marginalized will have this moment in the spotlight. But when you do, it is going to be everyone's responsibility again, and particularly the Black community, who knows what it feels like to be
Yeah,
behind you when the world is behind you. And this is not leaving anyone behind. This is all about, this is full inclusion. And even though,
right.
unity through community is not limited to Black support, it's everyone. However, we do have to use this forward momentum and worldwide support to get as far as we can, before it becomes the next thing. Like, we want it to stay in the forefront, and we want to get as much headway as we can while we have as many eyes and ears on the topic.
Which makes perfect sense because at the end of the day, it's taken long enough to get to this point.
Absolutely. And that's
And
not,
as
and
you
I
say,
and I
keep it
have been
going.
I've been struggling with myself, Kylie. Like, how do I make this to speak about inclusion, but then to intentionally exclude a particular group of people would be asinine, and would make me, I would be speaking, in a double standard. But again, this unity through community movement is all about everyone moving forward. The gay events community, and particularly the Black men and women who are gay and transgendered and represent, other populations. I'm not so politically correct with, the different labels. However, it is for everybody. And so I want everyone to feel comfortable, because the intent here is for inclusion, not just diversity. And so we have to make that clear and be transparent and consistent with that message. Everyone can join this movement. I think that sometimes we might read a write-up and, feel like, oh, I'm instantly excluded from this because it says, Black Lives Matter, not all lives matter, or Black networking group. That the intention there is not that you're excluded. It is just simply to make it clear that this is a safe place for people of color. And to give a little bit of historical context, when you think about the Underground Railroad that took place during slavery in the 1800s, the stations were not manned by Black people overwhelmingly. Of course, Black people along the journey supported the journey. However, the majority of the safe houses and the places and ways that we were transported from slavery to freedom was all with the assistance of other people. So this is not, just limited to us. It's for everyone to take part in.
And I think that's a really important point that you make, because it goes back to our first question of the difference between diversity and inclusivity. Mm-hmm. The fact is that this is for everyone.
Everybody.
And that's what's missing with the tokenism when it comes to just diversity. So it's so good to hear you talk about it from a point of view where you're welcoming everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, what race you are, what color you are, what culture you come from, what religious beliefs you have. It's about everybody coming together and standing in the same space.
Absolutely.
And supportive of each other. And I think that's where we're at right now.
Absolutely. And, I hear pessimists all the time talk about, this is how long is this going to last? Or is this just going to be a passing fad, or people joining on the bandwagon? But I feel something very different about this movement, not just unity through community, but just as a world, community, a worldwide community. I see differences in this movement that I did not see in previous attempts. I think that there is great unity right now. There is a lot of, again, non-people of color eyes and ears on the topic that are speaking out very vocally. I'm hearing and seeing vendors that I know have had historical stances that did not support unity and diversity and inclusion. And I'm getting emails from them. I'm getting calls from them with, how can I be actionable on this? I've wanted to do it. I've tried to do it. I just didn't have the tools and wasn't willing to make the sacrifice. And so I think that, this is a very different time. And if we can focus on unifying everyone with intentional inclusivity, then this will get more steam and more headway, and we'll be able to cover more ground and really save the world. Because I believe that this work really saves the world. This is where big worldwide change starts.
And I think that as long as people can embrace the way you've just described it, then it will have that longevity that it needs to have. And it won't be a passing fad, which obviously is the fear here. But I think for a lot of people, they just don't know what they should be doing. I think what they would like to know is, how can they hold themselves accountable? What are some of the things they can be doing? And not just for themselves, but specifically within the wedding industry.
Absolutely.
How can they hold their vendor partners accountable? Absolutely. How can they hold themselves accountable?
Absolutely. So I believe that this is a very grassroots effort, and the only way that we'll be able to tackle it is from feet on the ground. And so again, we start with ourselves and having those honest and open conversations with ourselves, and we start to have conversations with other people. You can't really move the needle or move your own needle having only conversations with white people or people that are in your circle and in your network. You have to have conversations, Kylie, like we're having now, where you can get the other side of the story in more context. And so you start there, and then you have these conversations with your family members, and you get a perspective on how your children think and how the people that you share your life with think. Then you take it to your business and your team, and you start to analyze your team and break that down and get an understanding of what does my team look like and why. Are there some unconscious bias as to why my team looks all like me? And then I want you to take your team conversation and start to hold your vendor partners accountable. And it's going to be uncomfortable. This is not going to be a cakewalk for anybody. Holding vendor partners accountable for their vendor selection, holding the venues in your locality accountable for having an inclusive vendor list, and not, I've looked at countless vendor lists, and being one of the top pros in my community, I'm probably on maybe 2 preferred vendors list, and at the capacity and volume that we work, that's a travesty that no one has made an effort to put me on their list. And it's not that we don't have the relationships, because we work the venues consistently. So look at those things. And so that's how I think we can make some change. Then when you attend continuing education conferences, you have to leave feedback. You have to let them know that diversity and inclusion is important to you. You have to let them know that it is not an option, that they include people of color in these conversations. So we have to start with working within ourselves, and then we have to build that conversation and snowball that conversation out into the community, out to our workshops, out to our conferences, and all of our networking events. So we have to make sure that we continue this conversation from every step of the playing field.
And you're absolutely right, because interestingly enough, it was just yesterday I was having a conversation with my daughter, and we have many conversations, obviously being mother and daughter, but we had never had a conversation about inclusivity, diversity. And of course, she's at university.
Yes.
And it was really interesting to have that conversation with her. I told her I was going to be speaking with you today.
Yeah.
And we actually had a frank, open, honest conversation. And she told me that she's actually done some research and she's been doing some reading on it, because she feels guilty about the fact that actually by not doing anything, she feels even more guilty by not having done anything. And it comes down to that word unconscious bias, I think. It's a word I've banded around.
And I'm glad you mentioned unconscious bias. And I think that word, the unconscious part, applies to some. But then I think when you really look at the definition of the two, there is no difference in its meaning. And I think that we can use unconscious bias. In your case, for example, I'm not sure, you mentioned that you live in rural France, right? So I'm not sure exactly how diverse your town is. It probably isn't very diverse at all. And so I look at a story like yours and your daughter very differently than I look at a story from someone here in the States that lives in an area like mine, where the unconscious part does not apply. And so I think that we have to be very careful and call a thing exactly what it is. It's bias. Now for you, unconscious, absolutely, because you've never been given the opportunity based on where you live to have the stories. So it is different. So I want those of you listening to know that there is a difference, and we have to call that out, because to call it unconscious bias when we know that it's sheer bias is watering down the issue and not allowing us to do the full soul searching.
It's totally different, isn't it, at the end of the day?
It's totally different, yes.
I mean, I look at my upbringing, for example. I lived in a predominantly white area. I had a privileged upbringing. I was very lucky. But we weren't in an area that had any Black people.
Mhm.
So we weren't actually exposed in any way, shape, or form to any type of racial bias.
Mhm.
We didn't know anything about what was going on outside of our little bubble, really, to be
Right.
honest with you. And it wasn't till I moved up to London that I realized there was a whole world outside of where I'd grown up and
Absolutely.
where I'd come from. And it was a big education for me.
And
But I
that's what's required. It's life experiences, it's world
definitely,
experiences, and it's people experiences. And this whole topic is a human topic. It's not a political topic. And unfortunately, a lot of
yeah.
people's perspectives are so heavily based on their political affiliation. And this has nothing to do with that. This is simply about an acknowledgement of the disparity of Blacks in the event industry and across the globe, because this is a trickle down. This happens socially and then it happens in industry. So we have to make sure that we have the world perspective. And again, going back to the all importance of stories.
Yeah, and stories really do bring everything to the forefront. They bring everything alive. And I think they bring meaning to it as well. But I think everything seems to come back to being willing to put yourself in an uncomfortable position and have those conversations in the first place. And I've
Absolutely.
had several conversations this week, which haven't felt very comfortable for me because I am out of my comfort zone.
Right. As you
But
should be. But it
exactly,
but
how
it
can I
takes
educate myself if I
But it
don't put
takes
myself out?
absolutely, but it takes people like you who are willing to be uncomfortable and have the conversations and seek the knowledge. And so that's where, I applaud, people like you with platforms who are using their platforms to help provide perspective to people who might not have it.
Well, the way you, excuse me, sorry, the way you've described it, it makes so much more sense. It's easy to understand and it breaks it down in a way that really it's doable for everybody. You just
Absolutely.
have to be willing to do it. You've got to be willing to have the conversations, both within your family, within the wider network, conversations like you and I are having.
Mhm.
And then I think you've also got to be willing to open yourself up for criticism as well, as in
Absolutely.
constructive criticism on
Yeah.
can I do better? What else can I be doing? What should I be doing to educate myself further? And how can I make sure that I'm not just diverse, but I'm inclusive as well? So I think
Absolutely.
asking those questions and being willing to be open to people giving
Yes.
you advice and, like I say, constructive
Absolutely.
criticism. It's,
Absolutely. And you mentioned a key word is vulnerability. We have to kind of let down our guard, and our guard helps us protect our values. And I think that we have all developed a certain value system based on our life experience. And we typically use that value system and apply that to every situation because it's what we know and it's how we process and analyze things. But I think that we owe the universe and we owe humans the possibility that there might be something outside of our value system that we just didn't capture. And so I think that vulnerability is super important in this conversation, because in order for you to be able to understand and hear a different perspective, you have to be vulnerable and let your guard down.
and at the end of the day, really, if you want to grow, being vulnerable is a big part of it. Like we
Yeah,
say, get yourself outside your comfort zone. Be vulnerable, be open to people making suggestions to how you can improve what you do and improve who you are. And you're only going
absolutely.
to grow as a person by doing that.
Totally. Totally agreed.
Well, what I would love for you to do is to round off this interview with really some advice that you'd like to give the wedding industry. So,
Absolutely.
obviously, my platform here are newbies coming into the industry who are
Yes.
about to start their business, as well as the pros who are already in the industry as well.
Yes.
So, I've got sort of a double whammy when it comes to the audience and the platform. What message would you like to leave with them? What advice would you like to give them about tackling their own issues around this subject and some real
Absolutely.
defining things they can do to move forward?
Absolutely. So I think the most absorbent and impressionable audience is going to be your newbies, the business owners who are just getting started. And I'm excited that there are a nice amount of that population on this podcast, because the message I would give to the new folk joining us in the industry is to use what's happening right now in our industry and in society. Use that as as momentum and as your baseline of how this picture should be painted. Take this as an opportunity to establish your business with inclusive practices first, so that you can own and operate your business always on the right side of history. And then for all of our seasoned professionals, those of us who have been at it for a while, I want you to consider a new reality. I want you to consider receiving stories, listening to stories, and getting feedback and opening our minds so that we can take this season in this space that we're all in and move forward together, because it takes everyone in this conversation to really institute some forever changes.
I certainly couldn't have put that better myself. It has been absolutely brilliant to be able to talk to you and have this open and frank conversation.
Absolutely.
Yes, it is difficult when it's not a subject that you are, or I'm not, completely au fait with, but this is part and parcel of what we want to do here, is to really expose this. And as you say, take that time to sit back, really think, really reflect about how you can move forward, so that this whole movement doesn't just die out in a week or so, but it really is a platform for us to push forward and, as you said, be the right side of history now and not let this be forgotten.
Absolutely.
Now, if people have got questions after this, are you happy for them to contact you? And if so, what would be the best way for them to be able to get in contact with you?
Absolutely. I would love for everyone to follow us on Instagram at The Flower Guy Bron. We're also on Facebook at The Flower Guy Bron. And if you'd like to join my community and be further active in the movement of unity through community, I would encourage you to use the hashtag as much as you'd like. Also highlight as many brown and businesses owned and operated by people of color. I also would like to invite you to join my Facebook group, which is The Village. It's a motivational community for wedding and event pros. And the goal there is to provide an inclusive community of various backgrounds within our industry, so that we can learn more about each other's services and learn more about each other's stories. So again, Instagram at The Flower Guy Bron, Facebook at The Flower Guy Bron, and in particularly our Facebook community that you could join called The Village.
And it's just The Village. So if they look for that on Facebook,
if you search for The Village on Facebook, it's the Village, a motivational community for wedding and event pros.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure that once we get more eyeballs on this conversation that we've been having, you're going to see a lot more people joining. I know I will be joining your Facebook group.
Yeah, that's the hope. Absolutely.
So, well, thank you so much for spending the time in talking to us. I'm sure we'll have another conversation further down the line, and I'd be interested for you to come back on and talk to us in a few months to see how things are progressing, where we're at now, and what we can be doing to take the next steps, because you know, this is it's a marathon, not a sprint, I think is probably the best way to describe this. So thank you, Bron. Thank you for the time that you spent. As I say to everybody, watch this again, really take time to listen to what Bron had to say and follow him and become part of that Facebook group so you can continue your education along with me. And we'll be bringing you a lot more along these lines, having a lot more frank and open conversations with other people as and when they have the time in their schedule to be able to come and chat with us as well. So this isn't something that is here today, gone tomorrow. We're going to be continuing this education and continuing to move forward and hold ourselves accountable along with everybody else. So thank you for watching, and I will see you guys all very soon.